Hello there.
Hello, Member Foster. Thank you for joining. Can we go ahead and test your video, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Co-Vice Chair Moore, can we go ahead and test your audio and video? Wonderful. I can see you. And for your audio, please. Co-Vice Chair Moore, can we test your audio? Oh, yep, that's perfect.
I'm getting a lot of echoing.
On our end as well. Do you want to sign off and rejoin? No, I can't hear you now. Can't hear you, no. Could you mention that in the chat? I don't think anyone was able to hear unless anyone else was. Chair Barnett.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Hey, yes, Carly. Yes, we can definitely hear you now.
Okay, great.
Much better. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone. Let's see here. I think everyone is here who is supposed to be here. Member Cruz will not be with us this evening. There's Chair Barnett. Were you able to test your audio?
I was not.
Perfect. Yep, you're good.
Okay.
I can hear you. Cool. All right. So I need someone to facilitate this meeting, please, since she's not going to be here. Can I get a volunteer? Chair Barnett or Co-Vice Chair Moore? Okay. And there you go.
Hi there. This is the Community Advisory Board Expertise Subcommittee meeting being called to order at 5:32 on January 6th. And the roll call. Myself. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I have all members present except for Member Cruz.
Great. So we will move to to public comment, agenda item number 2. If there's any matter that the public would like to bring forward, this is the time.
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay. Then moving on to agenda item number 3.1, CAB mentors, roles and responsibilities. At this time, we will develop a list of roles and responsibilities for CAB mentors, including a checklist for new members and a checklist for mentors, mentees and mentors. And I was not here at the last expertise meeting, nor was I at the last CAB meeting. So if Member Foster or Chair Barnett could lead this conversation, that would be appreciated.
I have never been in one of these. This is my first meeting of this this committee, if you will. I was at the last CAB meeting, but we really didn't, that I can recall, discuss any particulars of this other than it was going to take place.
And I'll let Chair Barnett speak real quick, but I do also have, I tried to do some research into this, but didn't get very far. But I do have a couple of things to share with you guys. But Chair Barnett, do you have anything to add to that?
So this came out of the strategic planning process when we had the initial 3 subcommittees, and you guys have to forgive me, I've got a head cold, so apologies in advance for how I sound, but we started this out of the strategic planning process. And this was part of kind of identifying one of the problems. So when everybody comes on board the community advisory board, there's always this learning curve, and this was one of the solutions to it. And it has to do with the fact that you can serve on this board for upwards of a year and still be learning kind of the how does everything work, right? And CAB is one of those very dynamic boards, and there's a lot to dive in on. And it's at the charter level, and oftentimes you'll come into a CAB meeting and you'll be being presented from different departments. And there was just kind of this feeling like if someone was coming in from the community that didn't have a lot of experience working with the city, there's just a lot to take on with CAB in particular and figuring out your roles and responsibilities. And so that was the idea with the mentorship program of members who had been on for a couple of years and or members, it really is not a question about members who've been on for a number of years. It was about experienced members who have worked with the city in the past, who kind of dive in and hit the ground running, could just as easily be a mentor to a new CAB board member. And it was really just for helping new members that need the help, that are coming in and are learning about the city's structure, are learning about the different departments, about CAB's role, what comes to CAB, why it comes to CAB. There was just a lot of questioning, and all that kind of was what came out of the strategic plan. And so this was one of the solutions that this subcommittee was tasked with, along with the work that Carly, that you had done with helping the city council with what an ideal CAB board member person would look like and what are the roles and responsibilities. And so that was the idea with the mentor program, was to help members who are coming in first time onto the board and learning the process. And the other part about it too is, so for myself and some CAB board members, we had a orientation with the city manager's office. So the assistant city manager sat down and handed us both binders, and we went through the binders and went through the resolution, went through everything that was ever approved by the council, and kind of given an overview. And then we had to do our ethics training, and we had, but there was never an overarching, and how does this board function and work, was the other part of it. And so I think that was the other part with the mentor program, and also a way to bolster up our subcommittees, because the idea being that, it's also a way with, because we're going to seat a new board at the next CAB meeting, hopefully. We're going to seat a new board, and we're going to have some new members that are getting appointed, since we just had an election, and the first charge of every city council member, aside from their committee assignments and that work, is their appointments, and they have a lot of them. So hopefully we will be seeing some new appointments coming forward, and those folks may want some additional assistance. So that's kind of where this conversation started from. I don't know if that helps where the agenda item goes, but that's kind of the backstory of how we got to here.
And I can say that we will have 2 new members joining us this month for sure, unless more appointments take place before then. However, we are also down 2 members as of yesterday.
Yeah, I was about to say there's 2 polls going on, the 2 appointments, but we're going to have 2 vacancies. I don't know. So I don't know who was on the call with the mayor Monday night, but, and I want to bring this, you were on it. Okay, score. Okay. So you were on that call, and he did put out, and then, to the group that boards and commissions and appointments are open right now. Danielle, can you confirm on this? Will, Member Okanya just announced her appointment to the county planning commission. So I don't know protocol wise, but I'm going to make a huge assumption she's probably going to be moving over to that commission, and then that means that becomes a vacancy.
That's correct. She was one of the people who resigned. However, she will fulfill her CAB appointment until Councilmember Fleming appoints someone to her seat. Yeah. Yay.
Who is the other person that is resigning from the board?
Member Cruz will be leaving us as well. So she is the southeast. Oh, I'm sorry. No, she's the south area seat member on the board. So anyone can apply for that position if they live south of Highway 12.
And we spoke or communicated about my where I am. I mean, where do I stand? I'm not even clear.
So if you want to continue your position with the CAB, you need to get a letter into the city clerk's office immediately, letting them know that you are in fact wanting to stay. That way the council member who has, I think, one of the new council members will be taking over that appointment. And I'm not sure which one it is yet. So they need to let that council member know that you would like to stay.
Okay.
Yeah. So do it immediately because they are quickly interviewing people and filling those spots.
Okay. If you could send me, an email address and a
Sure.
name who I should reach out to.
Sure.
And am I at large, or am I I can't remember if I'm downtown, if I thought.
Yeah, you're downtown.
Okay.
That's correct. Okay. So let me just write this down. So I just took a look. So we have 9 members total with those 2 resignations and the 2 new incoming CAB members. Currently 9 members total. 6 of those have been with the CAB for at least a year or more. And 3 of them, which includes you, Member Foster, have been with the CAB less than a year, and would be considered more of the mentee rather than the mentor. So, there's that. However, once we get the full board, we'll have 6 total CAB veterans basically, and then 8. Is that right? Yes, 8 new members. So something to consider. But I think it sounded like the CAB wanted to move forward with exploring this and doing the mentor program at the last meeting. So that's why it's on the agenda. And I thought we would brainstorm for a little bit as to what the roles and responsibilities of the mentors would be. And like I said, I did a little bit of research. I found a good article from Harvard Business Review. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Harvard Business Review on mentorship and what it means to be a good mentor. So I can go through that with you guys if you want, or we could just go ahead and start brainstorming. It's up to you.
Well, it'd be nice to know kind of what the official format might be, or and then kind of get more specific to what CAB does. And being a newer member, obviously, you come in, you don't know the other members, you don't know kind of their history on the board, what they've, what they're kind of trying to accomplish, what they've done in the past. Obviously, you can read about CAB, but it's like anything else. You can get a law degree or a real estate license, but it doesn't mean you can practice law or do real estate. You don't really
Right.
know much. So
Right. So maybe we talk about that then. Talk about kind of the overall structure of the mentorship program then, and what that's going to look like first.
sure.
Who wants to? It's the three of you.
Are you going to go over, review the Harvard business? Okay.
If that's helpful to you guys before we start this
It is.
conversation, then yeah. Okay.
Especially if you found it to be sort of considered, I mean, it's definitely sounds like a scholarly
Mhm.
report on mentorship, hopefully in regards to some sort of public entity. But it's always easier to springboard off of that type of thing rather than create initially.
Yeah, what I found in my initial search was all related to employee mentorship programs. So, things that different organizations offer. But it definitely, I think we can take this and mold it into something that's more appropriate for a board or a commission. That I actually did not find. So I'm sure that things like this take place for like different councils, boards, commissions. It's just, there's not a whole lot of info out there that's been published. So let me see here. What I'll start with is that the article talks about at minimum, mentor competence requires what's called functional mentoring skills, which include, which they refer to as teachable micro skills. So some of the examples they give are great mentors consistently and skillfully offer generous listening, affirmation, challenge, feedback and insider information, networking, visibility, intentional role modeling, professional socialization, advocacy, and increasing mutuality and collegiality. And then it says there's strong evidence that these skills can be instilled and refined through mentor development training. And then there's foundational virtues and abilities. Excellent mentors demonstrate virtues such as personal integrity, good judgment around boundaries and confidentiality, and an inclination toward caring and acting with their mentee's best interest at heart. These abilities also include other-oriented empathy and self-awareness. So it's no surprise that highly rated mentors showed high levels of emotional intelligence, which is very interesting because actually that emotional intelligence is a required training for all city staff to go through. So it might be interesting to, I don't know if it, if the CAB would be interested in that, but that's a really great training to have available in this line of work, especially if you are as a board for community engagement activities. Let's see, mentees also report that to build trust and successfully launch relationships with them, mentors need empathy, genuineness, and approachability. So those are the kind of the key skills or I guess descriptions of a good mentor. There was something else I was going to say, and now I'm totally blanking on it.
Glaring missing quality or action, and that's commitment to the role.
Right. Yeah.
You could be all those things and not really be committed, and then you wouldn't be able to actionize those things very well.
That's a very good point. And we've seen that even with commitment to, other things here on the CAB as well. Commitment to the activities that you say you're going to do. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
So those are the kind of the qualities.
Mm-hmm.
Does the Harvard information go into responsibilities?
They don't go into responsibilities, no. I think that we really need to like think about like what are the needs of new cab members and what can we kind of tailor to make, you know, what kind of responsibility should the mentor have in order to effectively mentor these new, sorry, my dog is like licking his food bowl because he thinks he's starving. He's on a diet. He needs to lose weight. That the responsibilities that the mentors have to effectively mentor their mentees, basically. There's a lot of mentors and mentees in that sentence.
So I'll throw this out there. I think that one of the things I think that might be helpful, that kind of comes up as a recurring theme, and it helped for myself especially, was when I came on to the cab, it was kind of this, I had a vague idea from what the resolution said and kind of what the charter said of what the cab was going to do. But one of the things I kind of had to stumble through, at least the first practically 2 years on the cab, was what my ideas and things of achievement, things I wanted to see the cab doing, or things that I thought that would be helpful, that I wanted to see our residents getting access to. Because I came onto the cab and my big announcement was that this isn't fun, I'm not doing it, because I went to the Neighbor Summit that they hosted with Jim Dyers, and he was talking about block parties, and I was like, I want Santa Rosa to go on the map as being the city that has the most block parties of any city in the United States. And then I went on and said, I don't want to have the biggest block party. I was really into this block party thing. Don't ask me why. I just was like, I need more excuses to have fun in my life. And I had no idea at that point how we got to there where the city would be actually advocating, because when I came on the cab, if you want to have a block party, it was this big protocol nightmare that required you getting permits, and you had to jump through 3 different departments, and it was this big headache, and most neighborhoods do it by ad hoc, and you had to stumble across it, and the cab had no idea which neighborhoods were doing neighbor block parties. And it was ridiculous to me, because I was like, this is something that could be really beneficial. And I had no idea at that time in 2013 that, lo and behold, years later, we would adopt NeighborFest and literally have city sponsored, let's get the neighbors together and have a block party as our model with the community improvement grants. And not only, and I was just like, I just want to make it so it's really easy for people to have block parties. I had no idea that we would actually have city sponsored, where it's like, no, neighborhoods, we're going to give you the funds and the resources because we want you to have a block party. Like that, to me, it was like jump out of my seat joy. But I'm not kidding. It was like when I first came on, the first 2 years was, aside from figuring out the board, but also like, what can I do? What can I actually do on the board? And my first year, me and a couple other board members, like, I just got hit with roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, because we had amazing cab grants come forward. We couldn't do anything with them because they didn't fall into the guidelines, because they were so, and I was ticked off that I couldn't get organizations that I want to get funded. And so kind of my first year on the cab was just figuring out, okay, who do we have to talk to and how do we have to formulate so we can make changes in the cab grant program to make it more accessible? And figuring out process and protocol. And so one of the things I think, if we're going to do mentor or mentee program, is the first part of it has to be like sitting down with new board members and having a crucial conversation of, what are the top 3 things you would like to achieve with this board?
Okay.
That's a starting point. And then an experienced board member can say, okay, these are your top 3 things. Here's who we would have to talk to. Here's what this, which of the subcommittees are working on something like this already. And these are the departments in the city that are directly related to these goals or the things that you're trying to do. And the other part is, if the mentor doesn't know, it's also an education opportunity. And we're going to go to Danielle, and we're going to go to Macaulay and find out, like, okay, who do we have to talk to? That to me would be like a starting point, right? Because prime example, right, is that, Member Foster came in and jumped in. You're in the downtown, right? Your downtown or your core, right?
Well, downtown, I mean, I live and work here, so
Yeah. So for me, I was like, sweet, because you have a business, you're in the downtown area station plan is happening as we speak, in addition to the general plan. And I'm like, this is a perfect opportunity for us to have somebody who has an operating business in the downtown that area desperately needs representation, right? And I'm sure for you, you're like, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to be able to do stuff. But figuring out like the goals, the things that you would like to achieve on the cab,
Right.
I feel like when you come in, it's like, okay, top 3 things that you'd like to achieve, and then how do I do that, right?
Well, what I'm hearing, starting with Harvard, in order to manifest what, Danielle was talking about, I think you'd have to send the mentors to Harvard to get a degree in mentorship. So to simplify it, I think, what you're saying in terms of goals, I think we should have a short list, but one should be, and a priority would be goal setting, with the mentor talking about, like you just did, and kind of what you're working on now. And then once you set your goals, and then the next thing is like, how do you wade your way through? I mean, I'm a bit familiar. I'm a commercial real estate broker, and I have a lot of clients and know a lot of merchants downtown. So one of my goals is to, and a project, and thank God they did it, was to light up downtown Santa Rosa. I mean, it just last Christmas, and I'll be brief, but, walking down 4th Street from E Street, the only lights in downtown Santa Rosa were Sawyer's wrapped trees. That was the only Christmas type in a window, in a tree. It was unbelievable. And yet we had merchants complaining because nobody comes downtown to shop. Well, it's not attractive and it's not safe. People don't feel safe. I've talked to police downtown with children. Would you bring your kids down here at night? So, these are some things that I'd like to see happen with the DAO as well. And they have a bit of a budget. So I kind of understand the process and the roadblocks. But that's the type of thing where I agree, why are you on this board? What would you like to see happen? Let's formalize it with, some sort of a goal sheet or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's like.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that too, like you have your 3 goals or 3 things that you want to accomplish. And then having that conversation of, you had your orientation, here's the CAB strategic plan. This is what we work on. Let's see how we can figure out how to accomplish those things within the strategic plan. Like, here's how it fits in there. And let's, instead of creating more work for the CAB, let's utilize what we're already doing and what we already have so we can get these things done, for you and for the rest of the board. So I think that those are all great ideas.
Well, and putting people in the proper committee, what are your goals?
Exactly.
Until you know what their goals are, you don't know where to plug them into a committee necessarily. So.
Right.
And
Okay.
you're talking about the 3 committees that we have, or now 2.
Mm-hmm. The 2. Yeah.
And then Danielle does everything else. She has to budget and finance, and there probably is a budget committee, but.
So just to carry, and I'm embarrassed to say, Member Foster, I don't know your first name because.
Oh, it's Kevin.
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 Just to use Kevin's example about the lights, lighting up 4th Street and downtown. How would that get accomplished via the CAB? And I'm asking that in context of the fact that, and I know we've updated our description of a CAB member and roles and those roles and responsibilities, but I think sometimes you hear the words community advisory board, and just hearing those 3 words together, I I think one can take away their own meaning about that, not considering the charter, not considering the strategic plan and the identified goals that the existing CAB is currently working on. And you might come to the CAB thinking, this is the way that I can light up the city. So how would that happen? And even being a somewhat experienced CAB member, I don't think the CAB is the way to do that.
Well, I was using that as an example.
No, it's a perfect example because I think that we draw interest from the community for reasons just like that. And it could be different, but where I'm going with this is people may come to the board apply to the board with the thought of having 1+ ideas of what they want to contribute, but this particular advisory board may not be the venue for that. And so, and that can come up in the orientation, but also through mentorship, we would want to try to help redirect or embrace those individual member goals here. And how would we do that?
So I have an idea of how we would do that, utilizing the CAB strategic plan, the strategic plan. There's a couple ways, both the charter and the strategic plan. So with the charter, there's the requirement that you attend so many community meetings or neighborhood meetings, whatever. Member Foster, I think that you mentioned you're part of the downtown organization. What is it? Organizing?
Yeah. Organization.
Yeah. So you attend those meetings. I'm assuming that members get to participate in that, and so you hear like concerns like, "Hey, customers aren't coming down here because we don't know why they're coming down here." And you can say, "Oh, well, as a CAB member, maybe I can take this back to the CAB and see if some of my other CAB members can ask their neighborhood contacts or community contacts, hey, we're hearing that downtown businesses aren't getting a lot of customers. Could you tell us a little bit more why you don't shop downtown, if you don't?" So that's one way. Another way, this is also pre-pandemic because we used to table a lot, like at the downtown market. If you had a quick little survey, say Member Foster developed a quick little survey that said, do you shop downtown? And if no, why not? Then he can take that feedback back to the business owners and say, hey, this is what people are saying why they don't shop downtown. And one of those things might be the lights. And so that would encourage those business owners to then maybe especially around the darker months, to light up their businesses and make them more attractive, or do something to make it more attractive for people to come. So those are just two ways which I think we could tie that in. And I always have ideas. So if you guys have something like that and you're like, I'm not sure how to tie this into the strategic plan, maybe we can sit down and talk about that before it gets to the mentor-mentee conversation. But that's just an example.
I'm developing a survey for the merchants. Why do you think people aren't coming here? What's the problem? And I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
Parking is one. Don't feel safe, homeless, etc. The usual story. And then, everybody has problems. Now let's get some solutions. And I agree with you. I think polling the neighborhoods and finding out what would you bring you downtown, right?
Yeah.
Well, more events, less events, whatever it is, get the fountain in. I mean, DAO, they planted trees. The city, the one meeting I was at, there was a back and forth about the mulberry tree, not mulberry trees, but the crepe myrtle.
So, yeah.
Crepe myrtle, yes. DAO paid for them, but then there was going back and forth with the city. Who's going to maintain them? And it's, that type of thing. So there is, an interaction, and you have to work with the city on pretty much everything. I mean, I think about what they did in Sonoma, where they dressed up the buildings, and the city actually paid for that. And they offered to help. I think, you know, if the city, and again, this is something the city has to agree to, is, you know, let's have some uniform building light and signage thing, because people will put more lights on their building, but the process is arduous.
Mhm.
And, you know, we all talk about lamp posts, and we got into posting things on the last lamp posts, and yeah, everything has a root in approval with the city. So
Yeah.
that's all part.
Not to get too far off track, but you reminded me, actually, speaking of polling, that we are almost finalizing, we're almost done finalizing contract for our what's called the Engagement HQ platform, which is a digital community engagement platform that has a lot of different tools that that we are going to be able to use. And we also includes the CAB. So things like polling, surveying, there's a little tool called Ideas, but they're like virtual Post-it notes. So community members can come in and you can have like a question posed or project. And if people have ideas for that project, they can use the Post-it notes. There's a full open forum discussion that's moderated by the agency that has that platform. There's one I was really excited about. Oh, and Cherie, I know you're going to be super excited about this. There is a tool called Places. So it's a virtual map. We as staff on the back end get to develop the pins for different projects. And then people can go when there's a map open, they can go and play around with the pins and put them in different places. So if it's like a park planning project, for example, and you're asking for people to put amenities in the park that they want to see, they can use the different pins that staff come up with, like, you know, basketball court, whatever, and put them in the map. We're going to be using it on our end for our social justice mapping project. So looking at different places throughout Santa Rosa that have history, you know, like civil rights history, or like some type of history like around a Native group or another BIPOC community group, for example. So the CAB will be able to utilize this. So it kind of opens the door up for these projects and these different goals and ideas to come to fruition by utilizing some of these different tools. So sorry, got a little off track there. I just wanted to let you guys know that that's coming, and I'll provide that update to the full CAB at the end of the month. Anyway, back to mentorship. Go ahead, Cherie.
We want to use the mentorship, like, so Kevin brought up this great idea about the downtown and has started on the getting feedback from the businesses and oftentimes residents that are also, because they're kind of intersecting, because a lot of people who work downtown or have business downtown oftentimes live in the downtown area station plan. There's a close proximity. So we're kind of doing on the front end with the organizations one of the identifiers. And so, so one of the challenges is that with the pandemic, we didn't get these kind of direct requests. Whereas in the past, we would do community events, we would do community polling, we would do CIP polling in the person. And one of the things that happens, you know, I remember from being at the booth as a member of CAB, residents will just ask us direct questions like that of like, hey, yeah, I live off the Prince Memorial Greenway and there's a homeless encampment. What do I do? Or, hey, my neighborhood wants, you know, has a park and we'd like to have a bocce ball court in the park. How do we get that like they have over at Burbank Park? So those questions will come up to you as a CAB board member. And the number one thing that we do on our end as board members is the first thing is identify the city department that would even fall under, right? So was it under Parks and Rec? Is it under TPW? In this particular case, because it's the downtown, there's two questions asked. Is the lighting issue, was it identified in the, of course you get to hear my dog whining here, right? So the first question I would say is like, was the lighting issue in the downtown identified in the listening sessions with the downtown area station plan? So that's a big question, because if it's in the plan, then oftentimes there's a corresponding set of goals and or an action from the different departments. In other words, it may already be in the works that TPW has it as a goal, and it could be a budgeting issue. And ultimately, with things like CIP, it's always a budgeting issue of where the money is going to come from. The
Right.
second thing I would say, though, especially for this one, if I was mentoring, so if Kevin was coming on as a brand new board member and was bringing this issue to me as a CAB board member, I would say the other thing to think about is we are in a unique opportunity because the PG&E settlement of $95 million has happened and the city council and the mayor has gone out and put a plea out to the residents of Santa Rosa to prioritize that 95 million. You know, in other words, like after Coffee Park, after the neighborhoods that were directly impacted, after the loss of the fire station that we're not going to get federal funding from, of that remaining funds that are available, the city council and the mayor, both, you know, both Mayor Schwalhelm and Mayor Rogers have come forward and said, we want community feedback on how we should allocate this 95 million. So as you know, as if I was a mentoring board member, I would say to Kevin, you know, so a direct action that I would say would benefit those constituents that you're hearing from about this issue would be start with the fact that there's this $95 million settlement fund and the city wants feedback on it, and they are looking at one-time purchases as an opportunity. This is one of those that could come into play. And then the other question I would say is that let's find out, is it in the downtown area station plan? Was it brought forward in the community discussions? Is it already being brought forward in the downtown area station plan as a long-term goal of the downtown have more illumination? And if it is the TPW, you know, is it under their list of goals for the TPW to take that on, right? In which case, if it is, then it's also a question of, all right, so which department does it fall under? You know, those are the questions that you ask, right? And that is, I think, where the CAB mentorship program could benefit, right? Like, in other words, we kind of do this little bit of discovery. We get those questions out there, what new board members are looking for goals and things they want to achieve, and the who's it's and the what's it's. And then you have an experienced CAB member that can say, okay, well, if I were you and I was asking this question, these are the first things I would do, right? And then maybe here, maybe there, and also bringing it to our city staff members because there's other areas in the city that we might look at, or there's other departments. And, you know, that's kind of, I think, what I think of what the mentorship program could be, because I think the big one for me is that every board member, if they could get like 1 or 2 successes out of their first year on the board, in addition to learning how the CAB operates and the things that we work on, I think that if you have that sense of accomplishment, right, of I went to this neighborhood block party, or I went to this, you know, public meeting, and these things were brought up to me because, you know, I'm a CAB board member. If you ever get that sense of accomplishment of like, and this, and this happened from it, you know, I think that's one of those wins that you kind of feel like I'm doing something, you know, in other words, that I can ask the right questions and I can get answers and I can, you know, move the needle forward on something that's important to residents or constituents that are coming to me. I think that's where a CAB board member then has that sense of success of like, okay, I'm actually fulfilling this conduit. I'm able to be that nexus person that takes an issue from constituents or concerned group residents, and I'm able to connect it to the right corresponding city department, and or, you know, when the council is bringing forward or different city departments bringing forward something that they want our feedback on or they want us to get out to the community, we're able to do that as well. And I think that's where the mentor program could benefit, is that if you come in as a new CAB board member within your first year, one of your top 3 goals is something that they can tangibly at least see a process to it, or maybe even an achievement or an accomplishment with it. I think that's where it builds that sense of how effective CAB can be, you know, and you know, it's interesting to me because when you look at the CAB and what we do, there's also the larger piece that prior to district elections, you know, we've had 3 council members come from the CAB in the last 5 years. And I think that was a significant shift in the power and the role of the Community Advisory Board, was that we had Councilmember Combs, Councilmember Fleming, and Councilmember Rogers. They all came from the CAB. And I think that's something that is significant, that we have members who come onto the board. And I think that the mentorship could be that other area of leadership training that I think some folks might be looking for.
All right. So we have this idea of the mentor helps the mentee come up with their top 3 things they want to accomplish, or those goals that they want to accomplish. So that's one responsibility. Are there other ideas either around responsibilities, around the program itself? So actually, before anybody else goes, I am meeting with our 2 new members, and Member Foster, you're more than welcome to join us if you are available for an orientation to go over the packet that this group developed, as well as all of the key documents that they will receive from me. And so, I would like to suggest that after I meet with them, then maybe there's that introductory meeting with the mentor, where you guys not only talk about those top 3 goals, but go over questions that they might have about the packet as well.
When is your meeting?
I don't know yet. I'm still waiting to hear back from them on their availability. Sometime next week, though.
Yeah, I'll be around.
Okay.
Are you doing in-person, Zoom?
Zoom.
Oh, everything's Zoom.
Yeah, everything's Zoom. We're not doing in person right now.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on the mentorship program? Any ideas?
I think for the role, I mean, the Harvard summary provided a lot of skills, virtues,
Yeah.
sort of personality traits even, which doesn't really get to the role. I mean,
Right.
I think the role could also be, obviously what we just talked about with all these examples was to provide some further orientation from what you provide in terms of, in the example of the lights, connecting with the downtown specific plan, like your orientation broader, and then the mentor's role drills down more specifically on the top 3 goals and identifying at least one to develop some SMART goals, say, for their first year, to help really measure that. And I think the role too is to provide some collegial, I want to say friendship, but that's not professional, but just some collegial connection as a member, to feel like you're because we do introductions at our CAB meetings, which helps us get to know a bio, which I think is a good activity, yet it's the tip of the iceberg. And so I think this role lends itself to some outside connection outside of the CAB meetings, to provide this information and connection and relationship building, to help this person, the new person, feel a part of, and vice versa. The mentor will benefit from it as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin, you were going to say something.
Well, along those lines, I think that's very important. It's also my experience. I've served on charitable boards and whatever, it's long stories, but I think it's important that the interaction between the mentor and the mentee, that you're supporting them, they maybe that weekly phone call, because if we're having monthly meetings and you're not interacting with the board and others, just to, check in, how's it going? You have any progress on anything, you have any questions, just to keep them engaged. I mean, everybody has their personal lives, business, family, whatever. And a lot of times it's not your primary focus. And so that mentor giving a phone call or whatever, or maybe once we get over the shelter in place, you get together periodically, have a cup of coffee or whatever, just to stay in touch and provide that support. I think that's important. And of course, you're going to get, to know each other, and that's a natural byproduct of that communication, I think.
Yeah.
Danielle, one of the things that I love everything we're talking about, because it invites the individualization of recognizing why people join the CAB, that they are coming to volunteer their time to serve a very specific and role of public responsibility. And what I like about this is all that. However, I have some concerns that because the strategic plan, was developed, they're what, 3-year plans, 3 to 5, depend, I see a lot of this pursuit of the reason why they joined a CAB for these individual reasons being happening outside of the CAB. And I really think that we need to build into the structure of our agenda of the strategic plan how to invite these personal, if you will, or maybe I should call them neighborhood issues, into the CAB, because there are so many departments that are charged with presenting their petitions, plans, projects to the CAB for input and sort of approval, and that's going a little far to say approval, just that they've run it by the CAB. And so I find that many of our meetings are jam-packed with the needs of the city departments to run things by us that we may have no interest in. That's generally not true, but I'm being sort of extreme here. And so again, to bring in the idea of the lighting up the downtown area, just as an ongoing example, where there's no room right now in our agendas for that. There's no room for garnering a collective input to Kevin's individual goal and inviting, say, myself, say, hey, what do you think about this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a great idea. Hadn't thought of it. Let's do something, or let's what? And I think structurally, maybe within the strategic plan, we need to carve out current or individualized neighborhood issues / business / something maybe more positively stated, so that new members feel like there's a place for their goal to be heard, to be joined, to be worked on, collaborated, all these good things that I think the CAB has the potential for. But we're so busy entrenched in this kind of a routine that I feel like is a little bit of routine. There's a lot of business. I mean, our bandwidth, we have limited bandwidth. How do we even then collectively as a board, like with our new members coming on, or in a way we need to have our own annual goal setting. At CAB, to bring in the new members when there's an election cycle, revisit ongoing or new neighborhood issues with existing members, and be able to say, okay, out of these 7 to 10 things, in addition to the CIP, and in addition to fulfilling the charter, and in addition to hearing from all the departments and what they need, what are we as a CAB going to do? And this really came up for me by attending the Monday with the mayor meeting. He mentioned 3 things that drew my interest as a CAB member, and they were that the school districts are resetting their boundaries, and he specifically mentioned input from the city council and the CAB. So I'm wondering where, you know, other than Sheree and I attending that, where that would have bubbled up.
I haven't heard of it.
Right. And that they're looking at their charter. Well, the CAB is a chartered board.
Right.
I think it's prudent that in that rechartering process, the CAB contribute to editing, updating, et cetera, and providing a recommendation for the council.
Yeah.
He mentioned, you know, the city council goal setting, and, you know, although they have their strategic plan, they're going to be looking at current issues as well. And I would love to see the CAB weigh in as a board on the 3 top issues,
Right.
so that there's more oomph and formality to what the CAB is contributing. So those, and I could list about 2 or 3 more things that Chris brought up Monday, but those are just throwing out as examples of, you know, where does all that fit?
Yeah.
And
I love that idea though that you brought up about having our own goal setting session. It's gonna, I think we should do it sooner rather than later, obviously. And by sooner, it'll have to take place because that's going to take up a meeting, right?
Right.
More likely. So I think that we'll have to do it in February only because Captain Cregan has agreed to come present on the Santa Rosa's version of the Cahoots model this month. And he needs to do it this month before he takes it to the Public Safety Subcommittee because he wants community feedback. So if we can, and maybe this subcommittee helps to develop, since this is more of the internal subcommittee, helps develop what that process looks like and how we're going to do that at that CAB meeting. That would be really helpful for me. Cool. And also,
Oh,
go ahead. Oh, I was going to say also this, how to build into the agenda the neighborhood issues. I really like that idea a lot because I also think about that. Like, Member Devine had asked several times to have the South Park neighborhood group come present. And the reason why they haven't been on the agenda is because I reached out to them and they're like, "What? We don't understand what this ask is." Like, how do we start incorporating our neighborhood groups into the CAB meeting and the issues that are coming up? Also, not just neighborhood groups, but community groups. Like, we've held these listening sessions and follow-up listening sessions now for the last 6 months with our BIPOC community groups. How do we start to incorporate, because what they're experiencing might be totally different from what some of our more active neighborhood groups are experiencing. They also mentioned that they want to have more interaction with the CAB, but don't feel that they are represented in the CAB and are frustrated by that. And so how do we start to incorporate issues that they're experiencing as residents of Santa Rosa? You know, how do we incorporate that into the conversation too? I think all of it is important.
You know, before we kind of jump to accepting that viewpoint as a reality, if we, meaning that some neighborhoods aren't represented on the CAB, if you think about it, Danielle, the only presentations that we have are from city departments.
Right.
So it's a top-down model, it's linear, and we then are expected to be these ambassadors of inviting, we're outreach workers to invite to these different study groups or committees that get formed. And I feel really excited we're having this conversation because when I joined, I had no idea, and I'm kind of boiling it down to some real bare bones here. We could decorate it better, and the CAB is much more than this. But in this regard, I didn't know that's what I was going to be expected to do, to go, okay, I've heard from the city parks or the this or the this. Now I have to go put on my social media that there's a meeting or 3 meetings. And so I thought it was going to be from the bottom up, that I would be able to bring issues up, but there's no room for that. And
Yeah.
I can't remember, and because I have, as you know, I have read the charter and I've done lots of research on our structure, but I think we really need, as a CAB, to communicate with the city council to consider abandoning at minimum limiting this ceremonial and token checkbox that these departments have gotten input from the CAB.
Yeah.
It is, that's all I'll say on that, because I could say a lot more. And if we got rid of all these presentations, that we could make room for the Southwest neighborhood to present, and or even our public comment. There were so many times that the public would attend our meetings and make public comment about concerns that they had about their neighborhood. They took the time to come, and it was on our agenda, so we weren't necessarily responding at the time, but I never really saw those loop back to the CAB. You dealt with it as a staff. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that was the idea fulfillment of even that person coming to the CAB, or the Human Rights Commission people came and for 5 hours were like, please look at our report, and et cetera, et cetera. There's no room in our agenda to do that. And I think, well, I'm definitely getting off track here, I think, but I think it does relate in that what we're talking about, hearing the top 3 goals of new members. If we don't change the container in which we're inviting them to share that information, it will become a moot point and frustrating, and we will continue to have turnover. And I know we have turnover for different reasons, but it won't feel like what they thought it was going to be.
Right.
So I don't know how to look at that, but I really feel like this is a very important but seesaws. It's like a pivot point. That if we don't do this, we're not going to be able to do everything we're talking about here.
Yep. And what you are talking about right now is the very beginning point of the spectrum of community engagement, right? The CAB is that right now, yes, people consider it the community engagement body, but right now we're at the informing level where departments come, give us the information, and then you guys are expected to go out and relay that information. And we've only gotten as far as getting that input from community, right? When we were able to go out, but because we're not able to go out and engage with people in person, we're stuck at this informing. So how do we change that?
But it goes, we need to notch it back even a little bit further. When the city departments are bringing us information, they can put an ad in the Press Democrat. They can go, they need to do their own outreach. Yeah. That is still a top-down.
Right.
Community advisory is advising the council of what's coming up from the street. And if it continues to be, no, the CAB is just an ambassador arm to the neighborhood, I just don't see how effective that is.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway, that is a little off roles and responsibilities, but I like I said, I think we can create a job description. We can create goals for each role to complete. But if there's if it's always happening outside the cab and not within the cab and relates to what we're doing, I think we're missing the mark.
Yeah. All right. We're at 6:34 right now. So I think what you're talking about is super important, and we need to continue having this conversation so we can figure that piece of it out. Because I'm still really liking your ideas about how do we build that into the agenda, right? I think that's really important, as well as that goal setting. So I think what I will do is type up what we've come up with so far, as far as like this responsibility piece. I like the couple ideas that you've come up with so far. And then during the meeting, when we have the report out, one of you can report out, this is what we came up with. I think it's a good starting point for the mentorship piece of it anyway. I don't want to load too much on our members' plates. So I think, so what I'll do is I'll get it typed up. I'll send it out to you guys, see if we got it all captured. If you want to add anything that I may have missed, that's great. And then someone can give the report out at the next meeting. Sound good?
We should, I mean, I know I just did a lot of talking.
Yeah.
But we should probably agree now who's going to do that report out so that
Sure.
We can be more prepared and a little bit maybe more invested in the notes that you're creating.
Yep.
I nominate you. I love your background. I think it makes good.
You raised your hand.
Point of
I thought you were volunteering yourself, not me.
Pardon me?
Okay. I'll be willing to report out with some pre-censorship so that I'm not only presenting our challenges. I want to be also presenting some of the actions and solutions of ideas that we're coming up with.
So I will send that out to the group, and then you guys can take it from there and solidify what you are going to present out at that meeting.
I just have one more quick idea that
Yeah.
we want to include in that. Ask the attending board members to give one thing they wish that they would have, learned or somebody would have helped them with when they got on the board. Obviously, the new members won't know, but what do you think would have been the most important thing that you could have learned initially before you started attending meetings?
Okay.
About the board, about its function, about anything. I mean, whatever they come up with, and if they've been on the board, who knows what they're going to come up with.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just a suggestion. You don't have to.
No, I think good. I mean, maybe even like, I don't know how to do it in the moment with Zoom. I mean, like a little survey. We could do it anonymously even as,
Yeah.
I know we do introductions, but maybe we could use that icebreaker / introduction time for a little survey and allow each member to have 3 to 5 minutes to think about it, to give a thoughtful answer and input it somehow. I don't want to complicate the technology, but
yeah.
I mean, if it could take an hour to get all the responses, so I agree. Yeah, they could just email it, whatever their ideas were or their thoughts were. Maybe they could write it down. I don't know.
So
Whatever.
we have SurveyMonkey. We have one of those accounts, and I can put together a survey for asking those types of questions, like an exit survey, basically, or something along those lines.
Danielle, are you doing exit surveys with people who leave?
We haven't yet. And actually this group was going to help develop the exit survey. So if you have some ideas on what you'd like to include in that survey, just email them to me. And I'll put the survey together from that. That'd be really helpful. Let's see. And yeah, I mean, if we do it before the meeting, then we can incorporate that into the meeting.
What do you think, Cherie? I know that we need to wrap up here, but
I'm always a hesitant person when it comes to surveys, just because.
well, just on our kind of the course we're gonna be.
I think that I just had this. It's funny. I just had this conversation with my boss today. We were talking about our own organization, and one of the positives that came out of 2020 is that whether you liked it or not, we're in a reset, right? Because we can't do things the way we've always done them. And so if there was ever an opportunity, right, like the mold got broken in a big way. And so even when there's been a vaccine rollout, even when we get to a point of herd immunity, and when all of those things happen and when you're at a point of reconvening, it's not going to be the same. It's just not going to be the same. So if there was ever an opportunity to have a larger conversation with the city council, to have a larger conversation as a board of how do we flip this idea of community engagement, like how do we flip our model? It's now, right? Because we've had this reset opportunity and we can look at it and say that, here's what we're aspiring towards, but here's the reality. And the reality doesn't work in some ways, in some really big ways. And I mean, the other part of it, I feel like with the CAB though is, and this is a conversation we've had for years, is that inviting neighborhood groups to our to our board is a wonderful opportunity, and oftentimes it only happens through the CIG program. But the larger goal has, needs to be us going to them to hear their needs and concerns and starting that pathway of us listening to them and then finding out what their concerns are and figuring out a way then to facilitate it into the community advisory board meeting. Because inviting a neighborhood group to our board meeting doesn't necessarily give you real community engagement, is what I'm trying to say, is that, that inviting people to come to our board and talk about a neighborhood issue or bring an issue versus us going to them and hearing what the concerns are and finding, active listening and finding genuine solutions of things that are finding out, okay, this is the concern. And then us being a conduit and going to the different departments to figure out within the city what the city can help them with on it. Then potentially having something come to our board as far as like, here's the challenge, here's the department, that they need to be working with, and this is what they're working on. And then that gets brought to our board. I think that would be a more useful time of CAB because.
And via CAB member.
Right, exactly.
So like in the example of Danielle with Southwest Neighborhood, she could be bringing back whatever their concerns are, or inviting one person to come to public comment to piggyback on that and or make it whatever. Yeah, no, I get that. That's good. Yeah, we don't want to have all the city departments check off the CAB, just like we don't want the neighborhood group to be checking off the CAB now too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, again, I'm not opposed to the CAB checkbox, and the reason I say that is because it is one unique way to get extraordinarily informed about what the city is working on. And a lot of times when these things come to us, we are getting information that, could have been worked on for 6 months, but in a lot of times, could have been worked on for multiple years, and it's getting to the point of the council. The frustrating part I share with you though, Carly, is like, and they brought it to the CAB. So what? That is part of my frustration of, and they brought it to the CAB. So what? Because it's fine that they brought a presentation to us, and it can be fascinating information, and it can be super, important, and it could tie into our strategic plan. But if there's no role, right? Like if there's no role for us in terms of active leadership, right, where we're going out to the residents and doing something with them, and or we are now actively a part of this program because we are going to do a resolution as part of our role within it, that's where I get frustrated, because I feel like,
and furthermore, we're often told that different departments are formulating a community engagement advisory board, a committee, and the CAC is a classic example of that. And I probably could look back at my notes and think of other things, but it's like, I've often wondered, like, well, if they're bringing it to the CAB, why are they formulating another community group? Then aren't we double doing and duplicating? And
or where's the
I just don't
collaboration?
see that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine with other CACs forming, and I'm fine with other departments wanting to have CACs. I think I'm not opposed to the city wanting to have more residents participating in different capacity. My big thing is, when and how do we then become collaborative in our work, right? Because that to me would be the ultimate benefit of that. We have this continuous board, but most CACs are temporary, right? They're oftentimes project-based, or they are plan-based. They have a timeline. Prime example, we just went through this with Downtown Area Station Plan. And to me, the gap that I see is that those CACs, I think it's great that they're forming, and the city's doing the outreach and bringing in different independent voices. But I look at that and go, CAB should be in a collaborative role with that, right? Because when the CAC disbands, right, when their role ends, who is then that point of continuation? And and to me, that is, I feel like it's a gap, but I feel like that's where CAB could be a collaborative role with it, because I don't think that these CACs want to see their work end and then it kind of goes into a vacuum, and they don't feel a connection to it after that. I feel like that's a gap, but it's also a real problem if somebody puts in all their heart and soul. Prime example, the general plan CAC, if I understand that correctly, it's like almost a 2-year commitment. Up to 18 months or something like that, that you are involved with the general plan, a 40+ year document that goes under revisions, but it's massive and it's a lot of work. The document standalone is over 80 pages. That is just the baseline document. That does not go into how much research and how much investment you have to make in each section and all the different things that you have to invest in that process. And I looked at the general plan from 2010, and you look at all the listing members on that community, or on the CAC for that plan, and how many of them still have an invested role with the city? Where, like, in other words, the work that they dove into for close to 2 years, how much investment and engagement are they still part of, right? Do they still feel like they are a collaborative partner that works with the city on this massive document? Because to me, that is a gap. If those founders, or those people in that founding document who invested and volunteered hours and hours and hours of time, if they don't feel like they're still connected to that, or they still don't feel like the city, and that to me is a gap. And I feel like, well, one of the ways that could be resolved, if CAB was a collaborative partner with them, it's a continuation, right? There's this,
And those CACs are often appointed.
Right.
And they're appointed to high business leaders, owners, and they're not they may have the leader of a neighborhood group, which is awesome, but they don't have the organic community or neighborhood input that arises out of situational or ongoing issues that neighborhoods are dealing with, that are often overlooked or accepted as, that's just the way it is. And so I think if we were to rehash how we do this, building on what you're saying about having the CAB be a collaborative and active participant in these CACs, we could be the arm that brings these current issues that neighborhoods or community members are experiencing that relate to the work that CACs are doing really at a higher level. I don't often see them engaging them down at the street level, to kind of, for lack of better phrasing. So I can tell we have a lot we can talk about, and we have a lot of ideas. And I'm wondering, Danielle, if, you know, through your notes, we can definitely look at them to do a report out, but I'm also wondering if we need to back up. I mean, I'd like to get a mentor situation going, because we do have new members, and regardless where we need to start or revamp or update or whatever we want to call it, we're still getting new members that we need to invite into the fold and bring them up to speed and support them. I'm just not sure identifying their, I don't know. It's still under construction, but I feel like we need to do that reach sooner than later, and maybe take what we've talked about to formalize like a strategic plan update or something. I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah, we started the process of updating the strategic plan last year, and then everything fell apart. So we can do it again.
Well,
we can start over.
Timeline-wise, I mean, the one nice thing is that the city council goal session is going to, so the new council's been seated. So the next big piece of this will be the council goal session. And Danielle, you might be able to answer on this one, but normally the goal session does have a community participation portion where residents, organizations can come to the council and basically have public comment. So I'm guessing there'll be something similar to the current webinar format for the public to provide to. But if we were, and you can talk with Magali about this, if we're going to consider a review of the goal session, we, first and foremost, the council sets their goals and their tiers, and then we could, as a CAB, schedule a goal session. Probably in March, schedule-wise. And by then, that would be an opportunity, because what we'd have to do, the main thing about our goal session is that, and what we're working towards, it just as a chairperson, the expectation of the mayor to board and commission chairs when we sit down and talk with him is, what are you working on and what are you working towards, and how does it align with the tier 1 and the tier 2 goals? And they want every board and commission, they want the work of that board and commission to have an alignment, preferably to the tier 1 goals. And that, and that was not something that came out of, that was not something our strategic planning process directly addressed, but we've been fortunate because the NeighborFest model and the work with the CIG program does align with the tier 1 goals. It does fall in, but our goal session needs to then look at what the council goal sessions are. But I also think if we did something in March or even April, we would then also have an opportunity, if we do want to go forward with new members, if new members would like to have a mentor opportunity or mentor-mentee opportunity, we could do that in the February meeting, for example. Council would have their goal sessions. It would give us an opportunity to have an introduction conversation about what these new CAB members would like to see, of like top 3 things that they would like to see or things that they would like to have. We could bring that into a goal session and see if we can find an alignment of what the council's goals are, what our new board members are coming in with goals, and then kind of have this larger conversation, right, of how we could all kind of, where's the synergy points, right, that things that we could consider adopting as a board, how they tie in with the council's goals, and with the opportunity that new CAB members having that opportunity to kind of, flex a little muscle, kind of, to see of like, this is what this is what I'm passionate about. This is why I applied for the CAB. This is why I asked to be appointed, and where we can have that synergy moment. So I think timeline wise, there's an opportunity. And I think with the new leadership, the new mayor and the new vice mayor, I also think there's opportunity there for meeting restructuring to a certain degree, or, this idea that Carly is bringing forward of a more ground up, from the ground up model, and neighborhood groups and ways that we can collaborate with the neighborhood groups, which is an excellent segue if we want to talk about item number 2.
Well, really quick, I think for the next meeting, let's hold what you're talking about. I think that's, what you just said is some great points, but I think that we can use our next subcommittee meeting to develop that goal setting session that we will have with the CAB. And I believe the council's goal setting session happens sometime in early, is it February or yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I almost want to say the preliminary work is already going underway because it's like the first thing the new council, the council addresses is
right.
Tier 1, Tier 2 goals. Now, I'll be honest, I don't see there being a radical shift on, changing with the Tier 1, Tier 2 goals. I think that there's going to be some very crucial conversations that happen because a lot has happened in our country and in our city since the goal session, and I think that there's, that has to be addressed. But I think the Tier 1 goals are going to stand, but there might be additions. There might be some pieces that are added into it, or they're expanded upon. Would be my assessment.
Okay. Does the group agree then to talk about or to develop the goal setting session for CAB at the next meeting, next subcommittee meeting? Are you all okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Were you going to say something, Carly?
Well, and obviously I think we should keep the CAB mentor role and responsibility on the agenda to continue to move that along to at least a functional, operational role. So we can wait till it's perfect, or we can try to form something and connect more with our colleagues, which I think is really important, especially with Zoom. Don't even get to meet people in person. And
I know.
Yeah. So
we can have it as like a ongoing or standing agenda item just to check in, and kind of evaluate how it's going to. The other item I had on the agenda for tonight was the grant. I just want to do a quick check-in on time though. You guys good? I mean, this should be really brief. Yeah, okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. So for this particular item, Magali and I had just a few ideas. So honestly, most likely, we probably won't be seeing this NeighborFest program happening again this year. Even if, everyone gets vaccinated by summer and everything works out, you still have those months of planning that were lost because we can't guarantee that they'll be able to have the event by summer anyway. And also, I don't think we'll be meeting in large groups with large groups of people this summer anyway, So we do have to use those grant funds though. So a couple of ideas that we had. And it looks like it'll also be dependent on council goal setting and then on CAB goal setting. But utilizing those funds to help out in the areas of pandemic recovery is one, and two, around the diversity, inclusion, and racial equity goal that the council has. Another one could potentially be around government, the government and reform and open government / transparency piece. So the other idea, so those were that kind of like narrowing the focus down. Right now we say they have to align with a council goal, but really narrowing the focus down to maybe a couple of focus areas rather than all of the council goals. So number one. Number two, We typically have one application period, and I really just don't think that it cuts it anymore. We've seen how that works when we have one application period and everyone rushes to get it in, and then boom, our situation changes here in the city and everyone's focus is over here now. So I propose there's two ways. It could be just an ongoing application period where people can apply every month, and then the CAB kind of takes a look at those applications, sees whether or not they're eligible and if they'd like to fund that project. The other way to do it, in the way that the Choice Mini Grant program happens with the partnership, is they do quarterly application periods. So, you know, if you want your project to fall in like quarter 3, for example, you have until this specific date to get it in. And then the selection committee meets and decides on which applications to fund. And then they get selected to do their project within like a certain time period. So those were the ideas that we came up with. I just wanted to see if this group had any ideas. Again, it may be that we have this conversation after we have our goal setting session so that it aligns with the CAB goals. Yeah, Sheree.
So okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So just so I'm on the same page, but this is, okay, 2019, we approved the CIG, the Neighbor Fest for 2020. And we have the designated neighborhoods. There was a little bit of confusion about whether or not the pilot neighborhoods could reapply, but we have established neighborhoods that wanted to participate in Neighbor Fest, and they were awarded their Neighbor Fest grants. And then the pandemic happened. We had to suspend Neighbor Fest for 2020. Now it's looking like we're not going to be able to perform this program in 2021 because by the time that there's any possibility of neighborhoods meeting, it's going to be 1, too close to fire season, and 2, the Office of Community Engagement and the partners. Like basically the city doesn't have the bandwidth as far as what we bring to these Neighbor Fests. So I guess but the thing I'm concerned about is that we have partnered neighborhoods that were approved, and so are we going to tell them that that they're in other words, like instead of letting their Neighbor Fest happen, I mean, I'm deferring it to 2022. I guess my thing is that are you saying is that we're going to tell them that we're taking away their funds for the Neighbor Fest program and then it's getting redirected?
No. So we will still hold those funds. And if they want to proceed having a Neighbor Fest at a future date, whenever we're allowed to have big events again, they can do that. And we'll hold those funds for them. If they don't want to, they can opt out though. I mean, like I'm thinking of like specifically of LSP, Latino Service Providers. That was a very specific group of youth that have already moved on at this point from LSP. They might not want to do that anymore. They could. We'll see.
Well, I'm having to rack my brain because this is going back almost, a year and a half. But
yeah,
the elementary school on Brighton,
Proctor Terrace.
Huh?
Yeah. Proctor Terrace.
Proctor Terrace, but the specific Neighbor Fest they wanted to do was Tiger Fest.
Yeah.
Okay. So prime example, Tiger Fest. It was tied into bringing the neighborhood into and onto the campus and we agreed to it because under disaster preparedness response, the school might very well be a emergency response site if that were, in other words, if that immediate neighborhood was cut off or was in need of a congregation spot where everybody came together. That was, I think, what we were tying it into. But I don't even know if Tiger Fest is going to be a continued event because of the fact that we've had the great reset in 2020. So I get so we're going to reach out to the organizations and say your funds are held. However, if you would prefer to opt out, please let us know by such and such date.
Yeah. The other part of it too, there were some groups that did the dual project, so the Neighbor Fest plus the physical improvement.
Mm-hmm.
we can say you can do your physical improvement project. However, we're not going to be able to hold Neighbor Fest. So, you know, you have a couple options. Wait until you can do the whole entire thing together at once, or just do your physical improvement project and drop Neighbor Fest,
So this
or
has
opt out altogether.
This has more to do with the fact that the council funded we're in a new festival cycle. That's what this is about.
Yeah, and they gave us additional funds last year
Right.
during the budget cycle.
Right.
They're more than likely to give us additional funds again for the next budget cycle. So I don't want to be in a situation again where we're accruing funds like we were last time, and then we have all of these funds and then we get cut off again. I want to be able to spend these funds. So that's why I'm bringing this to you guys, and then eventually to the broader CAB. So I want to get creative too on how we spend these funds. I don't want it just to be like, okay, we're gonna, I don't know, build a bench or whatever, you know. I really want to see, you know, and we had that presentation from Tara Thompson from the Art in Public Places Committee on the art program. Like, maybe there's ways that these funds can be used to develop some of these art projects. I don't know. I think that under the circumstances we're in currently, I'll have to check with the city attorney's office. I don't think we have to go back to council to get approval to use funds in a different way. I think as long as we kind of stick within this, you know, community improvement, the physical improvement, or the capacity building piece, I think we'll be okay, because the resolution still has that piece of it in there, basically, that we can fund those projects too. As long as they're part of a Neighbor Fest, yes, but since we can't meet and do Neighbor Fest, let's drop the Neighbor Fest temporarily until we're in a better position to hold these bigger community events.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then what's going to happen is that pot of money is just going to sit there until we're able to have community events again. And I'd like to be able to use it. I would like the community to be able to use it.
Yeah.
You know, in the
trying
meantime,
to think of, you know, because we are square one and we met, right? We're in this webinar universe, and this was my whole thing of like, what is the NEM doing in San Francisco? You know, like, this is one of those ones where I'm like, I don't want, you know, I'm out of bandwidth for reinventing the wheel of how are other communities doing community engagement when we're having to do this virtual planning. You know, the one thing I had brought up, I think I may have mentioned this to you, is that, you know, one of the things, you know, as far as community advisory board, when the vaccine rolls out, if there is an opportunity where the CAB could take an active role in, you know, especially in neighborhoods, you know, you can look at the county stats, and there's some very specific zip codes that are directly impacted. And I think that this is one of those opportunities where CAB could step up, of that once we were vaccinated, if we wanted to do a community outreach of free vaccination clinics and partnering with county health and being the sign waivers and being the people, you know, that CAB people can drive up in their vehicles and having that level of direct engagement. I think that's something that CAB should seriously consider. And if there was a way to apply funding to it, to advertise it, to, you know, like, this is a down the road for obvious reasons. We don't have the resources, but in the coming months, it's going to happen. I think that is something to look at, is that those neighborhoods that are directly impacted, a lot of times there are additional barriers that are keeping them from engaging community health. And so that's one of those areas where I feel like, as an organization, as a board, we should look at a bridging opportunity where we could go to Bear Farm or a place to play. And in front of that, the board take an active role with advertising and door-to-door outreach and letting people know that it's going to be a free public health event, and that, you know, that could be something that we would apply CIG towards.
And that's what San Francisco is currently doing in lieu of NeighborFest at this particular point.
Got
So I think I mentioned that. I don't remember when I mentioned it, but maybe it was for the Empowerment Subcommittee. They're not doing NeighborFest. They're not even holding virtual events. They are focusing strictly on what they can do to help those neighborhoods that are more impacted by the pandemic.
Okay.
Not just around health related, getting testing and making testing sites available in those neighborhoods. And then what you're talking about, making sure people know where vaccines are available, et cetera. But helping them get assistance with food,
Got it.
for those who have lost their jobs or lost income, where can they find, food, where they can get assistance. If it's a small business, for example, where they can get assistance to help their business out during this time. They actually have set up community hubs where all of those things happen in those locations. Free testing, assistance, getting their CalFresh, getting that. The food bank there actually comes and does their drop-offs or their pickup, whatever it is, with the food. They have it all centralized in one location in those particular neighborhoods.
Is that something
So-
CAB could step into though with the existing funds? In other words, instead of a neighbor fest, a resource fest?
It's definitely something we can look at. I'm a little hesitant at this point. I think, yes, using this time now to plan that out would be great, because the city really doesn't want to push for people to congregate together in these spaces. So it was something,
Right, no,
something that,
I'm specifically thinking of a drive-up resource
Yeah.
fest of you
Oh,
drive
yeah.
through and there's free COVID testing. At the point of vaccine rollout, a free vaccine rollout is a possibility. But at the same time, having volunteers with Redwood Empire Food Bank so that you pop the trunk of your car and we can put food in the trunk of your car and we can include the emergency preparedness kit. I'm thinking in those
Oh.
terms, and then using the CAB fund. In other words, it would be you and Magali would have to do the heavy lifting of all the different partners, but where CAB funds could go into it could be an emergency preparedness kit that has, a pamphlet about what to do in the event of an earthquake, what to do in the event of, and have a kit, I'm talking like those $5 buckets at Home Depot, but maybe something like that we buy in bulk that's city branded and is a bucket with, a potable water, a list of emergency items, an emergency flashlight. I'm talking like that kind of stuff, and maybe using CIG funds specifically for that as a rollout. Right. That's what I'm thinking.
So I love it. I think that we can make the case for it. However, I think that's a perfect idea for your goal setting session. And I think you should bring it up there to see A, if the rest of the CAB likes the idea, and B, that you have the support of your other CAB members to make this happen, because that's a huge lift. I wouldn't want to put it directly on the Empowerment Subcommittee because they already have a big project that they're working on currently that I want to see through, that needs to actually get seen through because it's also part of the open government work. So yes.
I'm thinking in terms of CIG's budget for 2021 cycle, and it's like $30,000, and so I'm like, what can we do with a $30,000 budget that's tangible and relates to disaster preparedness? And that's one thing I can think of. But yeah, I will absolutely bring that to the goal session, because I think you're right. Like, that would be the way to do it.
Yeah,
and until later anyway.
I almost see that being as a grant that's given out to a community organization to coordinate, because Magali and I do not have the time to do that. But it's also something that, so it's either contracted out to an organization to do, or it's something that the CAB has to pull together to do as a board to make it happen, because Magali and I don't have the time to do that at all, to do the heavy lifting. It's just not feasible for us. So again, address it at the goal setting session. And if that, if that's somewhere the CAB wants to go, then yeah, we can definitely find a way to make that funding align with that particular goal. Agreed.
I love the tangible nature of what you're talking about, Sheree, and relating it to disaster preparedness, which, sort of adopting the spirit of NeighborFest. Agree that city staff, this isn't their role or even to fulfill. Even with the hours they did commit to NeighborFest, couldn't probably amount to this type of endeavor. And thinking of a trusted either community organization, leader, or neighborhood group to, I don't know, everyone's in the same predicament of not being able to have a lot of contact. So that would be a challenge, a logistic challenge that would probably warrant some conversation about if, the pros and the cons, the opportunity costs of trying to roll something like this out versus the logistic challenges of making it too cumbersome to be successful. The other thing, so I definitely, let's continue the conversation, because I love the tie-in to disaster preparedness, because we've had Walbridge fire, the LNU complex fires, the glass fire. We have disasters while we're in COVID, so it's definitely a reality. But the thing about, offering food assistance, CalFresh, and kind of serving as a resource hub, I think there are county and city entities that are and organizations that are paid to already do that. And so I would hesitate moving forward in that direction until we had a identified specific gap. And again, then trying to pull it down to the neighborhood level.
Yeah.
I know I missed the last CAB meeting, which I think is where the art presentation took place, but I wouldn't mind investing in our time or consultant or whatever time or tapping into it. All of our city departments who are always tapping into us about what gaps are in our neighborhoods and what are the needs, to help inform how we can create like a request for a grant fund that would, like we had 5 or 6 needs addressed or identified that could substitute in the NeighborFest spirit. Like, how could we roll those funds out to neighborhoods in a way that individually suits them, just like the NeighborFest did? And that may be a pipe dream with where we're at, but I guess my long-winded way of saying, I think surveying some of the neighborhood groups, CAB members, other maybe community organizations that work closely with people in need to get an idea of where those gaps are might be helpful to inform this conversation.
And maybe we can use that digital engagement tool once it's up and running to get some of that input too, so that we have a broader range of input coming in. You know, because people aren't necessarily engaging, we can't do in-person stuff. It might be a good way to collect that feedback.
Yeah, we're in tough times right now. It's hard to kind of pick up where we were and plop it down into this new social distancing need for safety, and, you know, like doing drive-bys or drop-offs. It's like, that might be cool, but is that what's needed? Like what Sheree was saying, what is the need right now?
Well, and I can tell you that through the listening sessions, we did get feedback from those groups. You know, there are quite a few groups that are familiar with the CAB grant program, but they had a lot of feedback for us on moving over to NeighborFest. And some of the groups were like, we don't do that in our neighborhoods, or we don't do that in our community. It doesn't make sense for us. You know, this is what would make most sense for our particular neighborhood or community need. So I think taking that and kind of going along the lines of what were the gaps and what are the needs of the neighborhoods and community groups, I think would be really helpful as we move forward with this grant program and finding, you know, we thought we had it, you know, with NeighborFest, but then the pandemic hit, and it's been, you know, the pandemic obviously has been, you know, really difficult for us because we can't meet in person, but it's also been a great thing because now we're having these conversations and seeing, okay, well, maybe NeighborFest wasn't the only solution to what the community needs right now.
Well, and did NeighborFest kind of arrive out of the Tubbs fire?
It did. Yeah.
Which, I mean, that situation, terrible, but that was situational in of itself.
Yeah.
And as time evolves, now we're in a pandemic, and now we're doing concerted outreach with neighborhoods that we may have not engaged with before. I mean, you are. And so we've got new information, new external environmental situations. So, we need to, and maybe it's time to reevaluate the NeighborFest, not because it wasn't a good plan. And I mean, unfortunately, our community still experiences these wildfires that the NeighborFest model is super relevant. And whether a neighborhood, when you said some of the neighborhoods that doesn't work for them, I'd be curious to know what model is working for them in terms of connecting with their neighbors in a disaster.
Yeah, and
because that is
the
top, not that the funds don't work for them, but what is working for them in a disaster? How are they connecting? How are they helping? How are they rescuing?
And unfortunately, it wasn't the venue to, you know, provide information to them on what exactly NeighborFest is. When they said it's not working for them, they meant it as their basic needs aren't being met. And so funds like that, if we're talking about community improvement, you know, their basic needs as far as housing aren't being met, access to food, you know, in the pandemic, being able to pay their bills because they lost their job, economic opportunities, etc. Like they're talking about, you know, those bigger, like macro level. Yeah. And so while yes, we as Santa Rosa residents are experiencing a higher number of disasters right now over the last couple of years, disaster preparedness might not be like the top thing on their radar because they can't feed their family, they can't pay rent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So while it might work for some neighborhoods because maybe those neighborhoods have their basic needs met, it's definitely not a #1 priority for others. So, if that makes sense.
Well, so a couple of things, two things off the top is, when that strategic plan was developed for our CAB, I feel like we might be coming up, was it a 3-year plan or 5?
3 to 5 years. It says
Okay.
5 on the title page, but really it's 3 to 5 years.
So, I mean, maybe we're due ourselves to, I mean, we touched on the fringe for other topics, but maybe we really are due to look at our strategic plan, both timing and
Yeah.
environmental factors. And maybe with the new input of your community outreach that your office is doing, may need to take in new information to maybe go back to a more broad CIP grant program that is able to have flexibility to customize the grant allowance funding to then customize to neighborhood needs.
Yeah.
Rather than having it be through such a lens. That said, regardless of the hierarchy of needs, disasters still occur, and they are things that half the time people don't believe will happen. And so there's that combat of convincing people that it will occur, and it becomes a raging need when the disaster occurs.
Right.
So I don't know if that's the CAB's role to continue to fill, but I just want to just notate that it may not be in the hierarchy of needs because we're not in a disaster. But if we were in a disaster and someone's house burned down, then that hierarchy of needs changes immediately. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's still a need of convenience or necessity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that I joined the CAB under that NeighborFest program because it really appealed to me to have neighborhoods band together in the event of a disaster. And I'm just kind of stating a personal belief that that's still important.
Oh yeah.
And even more important if your basic needs aren't being met to help each other. Anyway, so we got a lot of stuff. God, how do we even sort this all out?
We do. And also I was just thinking, about this goal setting. I don't even think that and I think Magali would agree with me on this, I wouldn't want the CAB to have a goal setting session without having the information on the outcomes from the community empowerment plan. So I would like to do that first.
And we still haven't formally digested the Human Rights Commission report, which I feel like would be negligent to move forward without that information, and kind of trading our thoughts on that as a CAB to kind of get some consensus on what that means to us and how we want to move forward as well.
So this is going to be, I think, a process. It's not just going to happen over, right away in these next couple of months. I think that we have a lot of background work to do, probably some data collection involved as well, from our neighborhood groups and our community groups. And maybe this particular, because we don't have the funds to hire another consultant, and I don't think that would look very good either fiscally, to hire a consultant to do this. Maybe what this particular subcommittees can focus on as the internal arm of the CAB is this process of looking at the strategic plan and revising it over the next however many months it's going to take. Because I want it done well, and I want the community's voice in this. While I thought the process went really well last time, I think what was missing is we didn't have a lot of time to get that wide range of community input. We only had 2 focus groups, the Roseland CBI and Santa Rosa together, and I don't feel that's representative of the whole community. So if we're going to do this, I'd like it to be a process where we invite those voices in.
We should match with the districts that,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely.
And the good thing about the strategic plan, at least the documents, is they're awesome templates.
Mm-hmm.
And you and Cherie and some of the other veteran CAB members went through the process, so you have that experience of being able to model that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, it's not rocket science. We can figure it out. But I do like the idea of, we have a template, so we can kind of continue on that consultant that provided that information back then, and we can keep it forward.
Yeah. And we did learn, some good questions to ask and some activities to make it a fun process too. So definitely can use those.
Danielle, do you know, and this may be too fresh of information and maybe even off the cuff from Mayor Rogers' Monday meeting about the timeline on revisiting the city charter?
I don't have that info.
Because I really feel like since the CAB is written into the charter, that it would be imperative and relevant and a whole bunch of other connecting words that the CAB at least do an internal assessment of how the charter is working in relation to how our community is. I mean, I don't, Cherie may know, because
Well, I just want to put a clarifying.
Like when it was formed.
Yeah, there's a clarifying point on that. So charter review, how the CAB forms, the charter review process, that that response with charter review 20 years ago was they wanted district elections. And the council at that time took that community input and founded and created the formation of the Community Advisory Board, this 14-member board, in lieu of district elections. And
even
so
more important than
that is the piece of charter review that I think needs to be brought forward, because we now have district elections. I have made the argument that even with district elections, there is a role for the Community Advisory Board, because one of the things that we're discovering with district elections is that a lot of neighborhoods have no idea what their district is, right? And they have no idea how their district now intersects with this new person that's being elected. And, like there's this massive learning curve that's going on. And I feel like that's a role for CAB. And also, one of the arguments around NeighborFest and the disaster preparedness component is that it is a program that I feel that our board benefits from. And I'm completely open to the CIG program having diversity in it, and that NeighborFest can be considered one of the grants, and that we have a larger discussion about what CIG could look like and modifying it. But I do see NeighborFest as a direct action that is significant and gives our board a level of significance that was ambiguous in the past. And so while NeighborFest, I don't think necessarily, having it be the only grant we do, that is a discussion I'm willing to have at the board level. But I do see the value in the NeighborFest program and in the disaster preparedness component of it. And the larger argument around NeighborFest was social cohesion and the vital significance of social cohesion, and why it is mission critical that any city, any town, any community that wants to have long-term viability has to have social cohesion, and there needs to be a partnership that is ingrained in the city structure that supports that. And if that's not there, you're gonna have problems with, if a disaster happens, the vitality of those neighborhoods, the vitality of those businesses, and whether people come back. And so that was the tie back to NeighborFest as a direct action that we could take and embrace as a city for the larger argument around the importance of social cohesion.
So
Is
We're at
there,
7:30.
Danielle, with the revisit of the city charter specifically to district elections, and like Cherie was saying, kind of why the CAB was created, wouldn't that revisit just naturally bring up the relevance of the CAB and the value and all the other things? Like,
that conversation has been happening since the whole idea of district elections came up. And so, you know, on our end, we've been making, you know, the case that it's still absolutely relevant to have the CAB, because our council members are still, they're not full-time, like full-time staff. They don't get paid a full-time salary, number one, and they don't have staff. And so having the CAB it really enhances their ability to serve their districts, right? I do know that the city attorney's office is working on, I think it's redrawing the boundaries for all of our different boards and commissions that have those boundaries, so that they align with the district boundaries. So that is definitely happening. But as far as like, you know, I mean, that like I said, the conversation has been out there for the last couple of years about the CAB's relevancy. Now that we have districts, we're going to have to make the case for it, particularly in this next charter revision.
and Cherie, is that something that, I mean, obviously you and Magali are on that,
Yeah.
but Cherie, is that something that you also are a spokesperson for? And is there anything within the CAB membership or board that you need support on, or from myself or Vice Chair Graves? Like, how, I mean, it just seems strange to be the subject of such discussion without being a part of it.
So I don't even think the formal process has started because I haven't heard anything yet as a staff person. So when that starts to roll out, then the CAB will definitely be involved in these conversations because it directly impacts this board. And I'll ask Magali if she has heard of a timeline yet. And if she hasn't, then we can definitely check in with both the city clerk and the city attorney's office and see what that's looking
Well,
like.
we need to decide how active, proactive,
Right.
or passive, or you know, what is the board's consensus in being a participant and inserting or soliciting, or, you know, like where do we want to be on the spectrum? Do we just wait, or do we want to participate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's on my radar because of the massive significance of it, that this is the process that can, well, one, you know, there could be the recommendation that the CAB is disbanded because we have district elections. Two, it could be that the role of CAB is expanded, right? It could go in either direction depending on the process. And that is why it's on my radar. But I want to say charter review would be, it's one of those things that comes up And I want to say if it was 20, I know that the preliminary starts in 2021, but I'm not sure if it is until it could be 2022, but I could be wrong on that one. I know that Mayor Rogers brought it up on the call Monday night as well. So that tells me that it is probably getting, put into a timeline. But it's a very, just like the general plan, it's a very long, detailed, deliberative process. And it's kind of like calling a grand jury for the city of Santa Rosa. It's kind of at that level. And all of the report out from it goes to council and major decisions get made around it. So that's the thing, is that it's not something that happens over the course of a month or two. It's a lot longer than that.
Yeah. Okay. We're a little off topic, we're a little connected, but a little off topic. And I want to wrap this up because it's 7:39 now, and now we've gone almost as long as a regular CAB meeting. Member Foster, this is usually not regular. But this has been a really good discussion, though, I have to say. And I think that everything that's been brought up tonight is really important. And we need to have the CAB address this, particularly since we continue to see like these changes happening at such a rapid pace over the last couple of years since we developed that strategic plan. So are there any additional thoughts before we wrap up? No? Okay. So
you're going to send out notes prior to the draft, or prior to coming out to the greater CAB members?
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll get that done, sent out to you, hopefully before my Friday off, if not by early next week. And then we'll go from there. And I think we have some really good stuff for our next agenda as well. And we will go from there.
Okay. Well, do we then have a motion to adjourn?
Cool.
All right. And
Perfect.
a second?
Second.
Okay.
Quick
We will
question.
adjourn.
And
Thank
you're
you
gonna let
for-
me, you're gonna let me know about the orientation, the new.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
just okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for everyone's time. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.